That means he didn't hear a word I just said because I wasn't speaking into the microphone. So do know that we will be taking your questions and hoping to interact with you this evening. But I will have to, or Director Vunich will have to bring around a microphone in order for everyone to hear you. So just acknowledging the hybrid virtual in-person world we now live in. I think we are winding up. So let me introduce Chair Stevens, Jan Stevens with the Historic Preservation Commission here in Wildwood.
Thanks, Robin. Good evening and welcome to the Wildwood Historical Preservation Commission's open house. As Robin said, I'm Jan Stevens, chairman of the commission. You might ask, what is a Historic Preservation Commission? Well, we are a group of Wildwood citizens appointed by the mayor to be able to serve 2 3-year terms. At the end of the second 3-year term, you're out the door. And that's coming up soon for me. The commission takes proactive steps to preserve Wildwood's historic character. Did you know that Wildwood is made up of 11 historic communities? We're one city, but there are 11 historic communities. Each has its own history and culture, and we work to maintain this. You were invited here tonight because your home or a building on your property has been listed in the Wildwood's Historic Building Inventory, meaning your building is at least 75 years old. It could be more than that, or it might be 73 or 74. We kind of bundled some together. I'd like you to know that anytime you need a refill on your hot chocolate, just get up. You won't bother us. Go get a refill and enjoy it. Actually, while the commission is hosting tonight's open house, it's really an open house of Wildwood Historic Preservation. Speakers are from the county and the Historical Society as well. It's not just about the Historic Preservation Commission. We're just actually the host. This evening, before we have a chance to get to know each other, there are several folks who will be chatting a bit about Wildwood. I always like to let people know how 30 years ago, Wildwood got its name during the development period. Are you familiar with Wild Horse Creek Road up on the northern edge of the city? How about Rockwood Reservation down near the southern edge? Take the wild from Wild Horse Creek Road and the wood from Rockwood Reservation, and you have Wildwood. Be sure to get your hot chocolate. Now I'd like to introduce Joe Vunich, Director of Planning and Parks, and Robin Keefe, our Wildwood Planner. Do you know what our Historic Preservation Commission does to promote that history and culture? Joe and Robin are ready to fill you in.
Well, first of all, again, my name is Joe Vunich. I am the Director of Planning and Parks, and I've been with the city since its inception. So I do have a bit of recent history that I can always talk about with anybody that's interested. I will be very brief. My chore tonight, or task, is to welcome you to Wildwood City Hall. Our city administrator, like a lot of people in the St. Louis region, is down with the flu and had hoped to be here to kind of welcome you and make you feel at home here at City Hall, which is your place as much as anybody else's that lives in the city of Wildwood. And so we're glad you're here. Robin Keefe and our Historic Preservation Commission has done a wonderful job setting up tonight's open house. After the presentations, I hope to be able to talk with each of you. I know some of you, Mr. Ballard is infamous with his picnic he used to have every fall that I know it was a highlight for the Chesterfield Wildwood folks in that area. So I do want to welcome you. If there's any questions you have regarding historic preservation, we have our experts here, and that includes the president of the Wildwood Historical Society. So you have a lot of resources if you have any questions or if you have any ideas. We're here to listen to those as well. So again, welcome and thank you for coming. I know it's kind of a dreary night, but we'll try to make it as nice as possible in here. So thank you.
Good evening. So my name is Robin Keefe, and I'm the Historic Preservation Planner for the City of Wildwood. At least that's one of my favorite hats to wear. I actually do quite a few other things for the city as well. I am originally from this area. I went to LaSalle Middle School and I graduated from Eureka High School. I boomeranged back to this area during the pandemic. And one of my first major projects that was assigned to me was the completion and publication of the city history book. So I learned a lot about the place that I considered my hometown that I never knew before. And I have to say, I just really, really enjoy my job, and every day is a learning experience for me. Speaking of that flu that's going around, unfortunately, I do feel like I am probably going to join the flock of people leaving City Hall right now. So if I do not approach you and shake your hand this evening, if I somewhat keep my distance, just know it's not you. I'm not trying to alienate you. I want to know you. Please feel free to contact me anytime. I'm for you. I would love to share any helpful information I can from the perspective of historic preservation in Wildwood. So I'll be around. I'll talk to you. Just keep that 6 feet of recommended distance. Thank you. So I'm hoping to just tell you a little bit. I'm going to make sure that my clicker is working. Maybe not. Okay, thank you for bearing with me through that pause. But what I'm hoping to do is kick us off this evening with an overview of the Historic Preservation Commission's programs and activities, and a really, really big effort for us that's coming up. So we'll start with the Wildwood Historic Registry. So we did invite a number of different parties to join us this evening, but please raise your hand if you're here because you received a letter and a survey in the mail. Okay, wonderful. You are the impetus for this open house. The reason we are all here this evening is to welcome you to a very important milestone for your property, and that it has reached the age of 75 years old in the city of Wildwood. And that age is important because that's when the Historic Preservation Commission starts seeing your property as part of Wildwood's history and heritage. And the only reason our commissioners can do what they do is because we have to have some level of awareness of what is out there, what stories are being told, and what exists in Wildwood. So that's part of the reason we do that survey. And in the past, it's just been a 1-pager. Now I think it's a 3-page because there's a different form entailed. But essentially, it just gives us a brief overview of what your property is about and how it relates to Wildwood history. It does mean a few different things for you in terms of the review process. It means when you go through a city permitting process for any major alterations, demolitions of structures, or additions to your property, the Historic Preservation Commission would like to have a conversation with you as part of that process. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've done it in the past, but typically the idea is that the commission can offer technical guidance, helpful tips, and otherwise work with you to maybe document, if not actively preserve, what is there. So that's the reason for it, is just making sure that nothing is forever lost. If something is going to go away from Wildwood history, let's at least keep a record of it. Also, because your property is 75 years old, it is now eligible to be listed on the Wildwood Historic Register, which I'm going to talk about next. So in the city of Wildwood, we do have 14 historic landmarks. I believe I have 12 up there, but we did just recently add 2 more. And these landmarks represent a lot of different periods of Wildwood's history and different contexts as well. Our earliest landmark was established around 1852. It's the Hankin House at the Wildwood Historical Society property. It's one of the oldest surviving structures here in Wildwood. But we also have one-room schoolhouses on our registry and Route 66 service stations and the homes of early European settlers and historic log cabins as well. So we're always looking for those unique assets that will contribute to our broader knowledge of what the city's about and help define us, essentially. So now that your property's eligible, you can put forth a nomination for it to the Wildwood Historic Register, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But in addition to that 75-year threshold, we're also looking, is your property worthy of protection and preservation from a historical significance standpoint? So is it associated with an important person? Is it architecturally interesting for Wildwood or unique? Is there a famous builder associated with it? Things of that sort are what we would look at if you went through the local listing process. There's a lot of benefits to listing. Some of them are incentive-based, which we'll get to. But it's also about really maintaining Wildwood's identity and character. Some of the most successful places elsewhere have done that, have maintained certain historic areas of their city. And that in large part drives a lot of the success of those areas. The easiest one to talk about is probably historic Main Street, St. Charles, and what that has done for that street in terms of economic development. Wildwood in preserving some of this heritage is also driving a certain level of economic development, whether it's preserving our historic Route 66 or some of our historic community areas that also pair well with some of the amazing parks and trails that we have to offer as well. In addition, it's been shown that listing your property can increase its property value. You're basically saying this property is special because it has this historic heritage and link. And that can help you maybe establish a business that relies on selling that character, like we just talked about with historic Main Street, St. Charles, bed and breakfast, a historic restaurant, things of that nature. So it can help with revenue generation and income. Listing your property can open the door to potential grant programs to help you fix it up and do repairs and historic renovations. And you also get publicly recognized. You get a historic plaque, you go on a city website, and we talk about you a lot. Not you specifically, but your asset. There is a caveat here. The reason you would list your property is because you believe it's worthy of protection, that you believe that as it stands today, it tells a story that should be protected for future generations, future owners. And so part of getting on the local registry is having that asset protected through city ordinance. And so that puts certain stipulations in that the Historic Preservation Commission must authorize and review any potential alteration to the exterior of it, anything that would disturb the site or potential archaeological resources, or particularly any demolition would have to go through a certificate of appropriateness review. An example of that recently, our local landmark, the Ben Balmer House, the more recent owners wanted to demolish a pool that had nothing to do with the historic period of the home. And so the commission went out to the property. We had a conversation with the owners. We talked about a lot of different plans that they had because they were dreaming. They were new owners of this property and had all kinds of ideas of what they'd like to do. And part of the benefit of having that conversation with the commission is that they were able to offer a lot of ideas and guidance to that process. And yes, that certificate of appropriateness was approved and they went forward in their project. For potential incentives, so we do recognize that when you do list your property, you are giving up a certain level of control in terms of that exterior appearance again. But the city does want to partner with you and incentivize a listing. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it back to Director Vunich because I figured instead of going down this bullet point list, he could talk about how we've partnered with historic property owners in the past.
Oftentimes, when we talk about incentives, many communities offer property tax breaks or things along those lines. Something that is tangible to you, meaning you pay less taxes on your property, or if there are other taxes, the city can waive. This does not include St. Louis County property taxes. That's a different entity. So without that tool, what we end up doing is offer zoning and subdivision incentives, meaning if you're in an area where a minimum lot size is 3 acres and the density is 1 unit per 3 acres, we can actually consider increasing the density if it's part of a historic preservation effort. And we've done that. The River Craig House that oversees the Crescent Valley by the Merrimack River, we actually granted a number of variances to accommodate that an additional lot for the one that was lost because we preserved the home. So for a community that prides itself on implementing planning tomorrow, today, and doing our ordinances as honestly and thoroughly as possible, this incentive for historic preservation has worked very well. And so from that perspective, things that you think maybe we couldn't do with your property, maybe we can. And it's all triggered by preserving the historic asset. We have a lot of different examples. Again, I don't want to take all of your time, but if you are interested, again, Robin and I would be glad to sit down with you and talk about your property and see what the potential might be. All of these incentives ultimately are granted by City Council, and our Historic Preservation Commission has 2 of our City Council members as liaisons. So they are that conduit that takes the good ideas and gets it done. So again, if you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer them. Thank you.
I should mention at this time that the City of Wildwood does have a voluntary historic preservation ordinance. So it does require your consent. Every step of this process, deciding to list your property, that requires your consent. And presently, even though we've added the Historic Preservation Commission review at this point to your property, it is a voluntary, partnership. Essentially, you ultimately, unless you list your property and agree, to certain protections, we will honor that as a city. So I just wanted to mention that. All right. So if your property is really historically significant and you haven't altered it too much throughout time, it may be worthy of national recognition. And this is not a program of the City of Wildwood, but of the federal government National Park Service. So I don't know if anyone's heard of the National Register of Historic Places before. Okay, some of you. Well, it is a national level program. You're actually eligible as soon as your property is 50 years of age or older. And again, it must look like it did in the past, that they're a lot more strict than we are at the local level. That listing does not add a regulatory review to your property. It is honorary only unless you take advantage of some of the major funding, tax incentives, and other things that do become a possibility once you are added to the National Register. However, it should be noted that the local listing, again, is a lot more flexible. Some examples include our recent addition of the city's Essen Log Cabin, which is presently not yet reconstructed. So we did in fact add a pile of logs to the historic register last year. And I'm actually going to ask our Historic Preservation Commission advisor, Mr. Scott. His home was added to the Wildwood Historic Register in the last year as well. And it's an example of a very flexible listing. So
Oh, thank you. Welcome. And yep. I didn't grow up here. We moved here in '87 before there was a Wildwood, and what a nice house, which I then found out had been built in the 1850s. And found out some of the joys of an old house like that and some of the problems of an old house like that. In fact, I just went through a period without water, and as of today, I have cold water, but not hot water yet. So there's joys in these old houses. But I served on the Historical Preservation Commission for 2 terms, and then I termed off. I'm now an advisor to the commission. When I termed off, I figured maybe it's time for me to do this. So I nominated our house and looked at our house a little differently. Our house originally was built, it was a log cabin, it was a dog trot. There was a breezeway going right through the middle of the house. You had to go outside if you wanted to go upstairs. If you wanted to go to the other room, you had to go outside. It has been enclosed. The breezeway has been shut up. It's been sided. There's been a fireplace added. There's been rooms added. And I think this is probably a better way of, this is the way people lived. They had a house, they improved it, they made it livable for the day. And so that's how my house got on the register. It's not an example of an 1850s log dog trot. It's an example of an old house that's been lived in. So that's the picture up on the wall, the Hyman Scott house. Nobody famous lived there. In fact, the Hymans only were there a couple of years and left, and trying to find out more history. But once you go back before subdivisions, before their addresses, it's hard to track these properties down. So it's interesting. Find out about your house, do a little research, or if you already have. There's a lot of resources available to you. The Wildwood Historical Society is fantastic. What the information they have and the display they have. Their museum is beautiful, and their library and what they have is great, as well as the history of Wildwood that they've helped us put together. So that's us, and I'd love to talk about old houses. And I know it's 75 years old, then it qualifies. I don't know if I agree with that, since I'm older than that. That doesn't sound historical to me. And I know some go back to the 1980. Well, that's mid-century modern. I moved in when I was a boy. We moved into a mid-century modern house. It was brand new. So thank you.
all right, so that concludes my presentation around the Historic Register program. Does anyone have any questions about that program before I continue?
So I wasn't totally clear when you said if you don't register your house and and it doesn't get approved, are you still, because your house is 75, still under the jurisdiction of like having the commission review any permits you apply for in the future? Or does it negate if you're not on the registry?
So yes, you are still subject to historic preservation review. The difference is ultimately they aren't going to stop you from your project if you're not listed. If you're listed, there's that extra layer of protection, and according to the ordinance, it has to go through a more stringent review process.
And ma'am, I would add that principally it involves the demolition of the asset. That is when the code is real clear that the Historic Preservation Commission, with your permission, will visit the property, take photographs of it, recommend if any of the materials can be salvaged and reused so they don't end up in a landfill, those kinds of things. But that's the principal role once you're on that 75-year timeframe.
Any other questions? All right, then I'm just going to go through, give you a broad overview of what the commission is presently working on. We have a bit of a unique commission from what I can tell, in that really our focus isn't so much on the regulatory side of things. We do have that. That's certainly a piece of our program, but really we have a lot of project work going on. And one of those projects I'm excited to say is our Essen Log Cabin project. Who here has heard of Wildwood's Log Cabin Caper? No. Okay. I do have some non-raised hands. So back in 2015, we had a family approach the commission, the Schoenbeck's family. Their grandparents had actually owned this property for 100 years. There was a log cabin on the property that was originally built by one of Wildwood's early families and important families, the Essen family. So they offered to donate this log cabin to the city. And that very year, over the week of Thanksgiving, the cabin disappeared. No one knew what happened. Everyone was blindsided. It was a big to-do. The police were involved. I believe there was a few weeks that went by, and then they found the logs outside of an apartment building in Wentzville. Apparently, the gentleman who stole them had been from the area, was aware of the cabin, and was looking to make a quick buck. So we got those logs back. The city continued to accept the donation, and it's been a 9 to 10 year project now ever since to reconstruct the cabin. Because it came down so quickly, the logs were not tagged prior to their disassembly. So a few years ago, with the help of a consultant, the logs were laid out on top of the city parking garage just across from City Hall. And put back together. It was determined that the cabin project could go on. And we're finally at a point where we may very well be erecting it in the city's new village green this summer. We just got through a bidding process. We'll see how we move forward after that, but it is an exciting project. With quite a story. And in fact, we have one of the Essens with us in our midst this evening, Carl Essen. So next at the top of the commission's agenda is to acknowledge not only Wildwood's early European settler history, but also its African-American heritage. Wildwood is home to an African-American, predominantly African-American community, our historic Westland Acres. We also have local men in the area who served in the United States Colored Troops during the Civil War. We have escape stories, really interesting history here in Wildwood. In fact, we're presently hopefully continuing to work with the National Park Service to recognize Wildwood's history that has to do with the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. So there's some sites that we're looking to potentially nominate and list for that. So we are erecting historic markers, and we're talking about potentially doing an African American Heritage Trail at the Monarch Chesterfield Levee Trail in northern Wildwood. So stay tuned. Another huge project for us is recognizing our Route 66. Wildwood is home. It runs right through the center of us to an original alignment of the Mother Road. It was active from 1926 to 1932. Wildwood is also fortunate to be home of one of the area's largest tourist motorist cottage courts, the Big Chief Roadhouse, or previously the Big Chief Highway Hotel. So we have a pretty significant nationally registered landmark in the city of Wildwood pertaining to our Route 66. Next year is the big anniversary, 100 years. So we are looking to do a lot to foster revitalization of our Route 66. We're looking at potentially city administered grant programs for Route 66 properties. We're looking at a Route 66 roadside park and wayfinding signage and just a number of initiatives related to that. And finally, a big priority of this commission is youth and family engagement. I'm not going to say any more because our youth commissioners are going to present later in this program. The commission is also involved in the planning and design for a new park in Wildwood, the Pertner Park in the historic Hollow area. And part of the reason the commission's involved is because that park actually maintains quite a bit of its historic identity and landscape. The commission produces, if you don't have this document, I highly recommend you pick one up. But it produces this pretty amazing map, the Wildwood Points of Interest map. It's very popular. It flies off our shelves. And there are 20 scenic and historic driving tours through the city on this map. And in fact, we broke the city up into 4 quadrants and gave them each an identity. As part of this mapping process. I've heard our map compared to National Park Service maps. So I think we've gotten some high compliments from folks. Please grab one. They are free. We give them away. And then finally, I mentioned it, but we do have a city history book launched in 2023, and it was an 8-year project of the Wildwood Historical Society, the Department of Planning, and the Wildwood Historic Preservation Commission. So it was a great opportunity to work together. The primary author is Jill Von Gruben, and her vision for this book was the history of our city as told through the people who lived here over time. And so the book's just full of those oral histories. It really makes the history of our area come to life. We are selling the book at a discount this evening only. So if you would like one for your coffee table, I highly recommend it. And finally, our priority project for this year is our first ever citywide historic preservation plan. This is our opportunity to make sure historic preservation is integrated across city processes and plans and commissions, and making sure that everybody is on the same page. It's also an opportunity to develop a roadmap into the future for what we believe is worthy of historic preservation and how we get there and what the priorities are. And finally, part of this survey effort is determining where we stand today. What is the state of historic preservation in Wildwood? What properties do we have? What threats? What are our assets? Those types of questions will hopefully be answered through this process as well. And we can't really get too far in it without input from you. And that's a goal of this commission. We've been having conversations with the community. We've been doing history tents. Normally, we do a history tent once a year at Celebrate Wildwood, which is the city's biggest event. But we've been at almost every concert event over the past year. we're doing open houses. We really want to get the word out about our planning effort, and we'd love to involve you and your voice in that, because our history is important. We want to hear what you think and what you think should be our focus. So speaking of involvement, you can be a part of this too. Please attend our commission meetings. You're always welcome. There's a public comment portion. We meet on the fourth Thursday of every month. Obviously, we talked about the Wildwood Historic Register. I'm always looking for volunteers for events and activities. So if you're very interested in being a part of things, please approach me. You can also apply to be a Historic Preservation Commissioner. We actually do have quite a few commissioners that are terming out over the next year. So there will be positions opening up. Of course, get involved in our planning efforts. Those planning efforts guide everything else. So, that really is an important thing. Buy a history book, become a member of the Wildwood Historical Society. And most importantly, share your stories. Your stories are a living history. And when you share your story, you are leaving a footprint, a record, something for us to be thinking about well into the future. So that's all I have for you this evening. I'm going to turn it over to our many other presenters. We've got a fantastic lineup. In fact, our next presenter is Dr. Michael Allen. He is quite a renowned preservationist in the St. Louis region, and he was the consultant on our St. Louis historic building inventory. So he's going to basically tell you what he found out through the survey effort.
All right, good evening. Can I get permission to share my screen? Wonderful, wonderful. All right, says showing up? Do you see information? Good. Nope. How about that? All right, is this visible?
Sorry, we keep forgetting that we have to speak into the microphone. Yes,
Yep.
it's visible.
Oh, great. Okay. It was like I could just start speaking into the void, or I can wait until this is actually useful. Good evening. I'm Dr. Michael Allen, formerly of the Preservation Research Office, a consulting firm I ran in St. Louis for 13 years. Currently on the faculty in history at West Virginia University. So I'm beaming in from Morgantown, West Virginia, about an hour and a half drive south of Pittsburgh. I'm glad I was able to finish this project with Wildwood and come present it tonight. In the interest of time, I won't gobble up too much of it, but I wanted to share the findings and sort of outcomes of this recent survey of Wildwood architectural resources built between 1948 and 1950. This is part of Wildwood's ongoing efforts to ensure that there is a reliable and professional document of every building 75 years or older. We heard, we went a little younger in this work, but by the time these reports are submitted to the city and go through these kinds of public processes, often, we're past the 75-year mark. So I think it's good to look at adjacent years that are a little younger. So here and I'll flip through the actual document, which I'm sure everyone can get a copy of and have access to. We looked at 43 properties, and we, created a list based on the St. Louis County Assessor's database. In one instance, the building that was included was not actually 75 years older, but much older and had already been part of a St. Louis County survey. In other cases, the resource on the property is, either proven to be built in this period through other documents or assumed, and I'll talk a little more about that. So just a little bit about method. I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but we started with field visits. And if you were at the June meeting of the Preservation Commission, you saw my sort of baleful cry that I couldn't access certain properties. Certain properties were marked with no trespassing signs or clear indications that visitors are not welcome without permission. We did not do anything to intrude upon the rights of property owners. There are no telescopic lenses or drone photography. In a few cases, we just didn't get a good photograph of the building. We used the public right-of-way to make all other photographs. And in some cases, we were able to use Google Earth or digital imaging from the city of Wildwood to at least know basic things about the property. But all historic preservation work occurs within the framework of respecting private property rights. And I think that's really important when people think about the work of a preservation commission or even the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service at the federal level. They're actually pretty tightly bound. So all this work we're doing here is to help the Preservation Commission and the City of Wildwood make responsible decisions. None of this is a mandate to any of the owners that were included in the survey. They don't really have to do a thing. They might want to. They might want to actually help us provide some information in the cases where we didn't find a whole lot. So after the field work, there was archival work using the St. Louis Daily Record, a legal newspaper that reports all kinds of useful legal information daily. Unfortunately, Wildwood didn't exist when these buildings were built, so there are no building permit records. And St. Louis County does not really maintain historic records for this period. So I would say less than half of the properties were turned up in the daily record, which is a process of, in some cases, figuring out if this is the building mentioned using other sources, because as you might imagine, in 1948 and 1950, the 911 system street numbers that you all have on your Wildwood addresses didn't exist. So we're looking at, Old Horse Creek, Wild Horse Creek Road next to this landmark, or, Austin Fort Road in this position 600 feet south of this landmark. And often that's enough, but sometimes it took other forms of information, including directory listings, maps, and even newspaper articles from this period. There's a context developed here that is a part of all diligence in this survey. I did not find a single property that is individually eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, but as part of a survey, you want to determine whether or not collectively these buildings or any configuration of these buildings might have historic significance. And that's not just guesswork. That is looking at other approaches to historic preservation and architectural history of similar resources. So here I looked at the county's own publications of mid-century modern architecture and other surveys and National Register districts. There really aren't many. There's Ladue Estates in Creve Coeur, which is designated in the National Register. A lot of that hinges on its origin as a subdivision where Jewish Americans who were discriminated against in other subdivisions could buy and build homes in West County. And there's a survey that I conducted in Ridgewood, a subdivision in the Crestwood. There's not a lot of other documents in this period, and despite a lot of enthusiasm for mid-century modern preservation, so much of St. Louis County really hasn't been examined in any professional way. So kudos to Wildwood for continuing to demonstrate what a responsible sort of relationship to the built past might look like. And this survey is actually now one of a handful of documents that will be out there, and maybe it will help another St. Louis County city move forward. But the bottom line is there's just not enough information to say that, there's a collective finding of significance. And that doesn't mean, these aren't interesting houses. It just means in terms of the kind of professional work that would lead me to believe that there's a pathway to a historic district or single listings does not really exist here. And I'll come back to that in just a second. Just to get the findings and recommendations, this is the house here that actually, somebody who grew up in this house came to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting I attended over the summer. They were correct. It was not built in this period. Perhaps an outbuilding was built, something to trigger the assessor to categorize this property in this period. An earlier survey by St. Louis County Preservation historian Leslie Hamilton in the year 2000 gave it a date of circa 1900, and its architectural characteristics certainly back up that assertion. There's a second property I included, 343 Steeple Lane, showing it right here, that looks like its core building type fits a craftsman or bungalow form that would not be appropriate to this period. Then again, it could have been a modified building built in this period. There just wasn't enough information. It's included, but the survey form kind of notes that maybe further review beyond this kind of survey is needed. There's a couple groups of buildings that fit patterns. And so while we didn't find anything eligible for listing, it is really cool to see repeated traits. And this certainly, I think, will be helpful for future work on just narrating the history of Wildwood after World War II and seeing how buildings built in Wildwood are fitting into national trends. Our biggest category is this minimal traditional dwelling. We had 22 of these out of the 43. They're usually fairly simple buildings. That's not an insult again, but we have usually a side gable long form with the peak, on the side, and then maybe a projecting front gable or other element. Often, like the house here on Etherton Road, there's some kind of connector to a integrated or attached garage. They usually don't have a lot of stylistic bells and whistles, so they are traditional in their form. They're not embracing mid-century modernism, but they're also pretty stripped down of ornament or other stylistic characteristics. And here's another one. I mean, I think this is an interesting type of house that a lot of architectural historians are, gravitate toward the exotic, but this is the everyday. I mean, this is the largest concentration in this period, so I think that's pretty important. But we do have 13 ranch houses that have some of the traits of mid-century modernism, although some have colonial revival details. And if you're not familiar, the ranch house is, based on Spanish colonial sources in the southwest of the U.S. Some associate with California. That definitely fits, or other states that have these houses from earlier periods. But the mid-century modern post-World War II ranch is sort of a revival of this form. They're long and low, and they usually have a single roof form, although this house on Old State Place Drive shows how complex those roof forms can be. If they have garages, they usually don't stick out. They're included in the form. The roofs can be gabled, like the one here, and then above in St. Paul Road, it's a hipped roof. So there's a lot of variety. Here's another very big one on Highway 109, built in this period, not in 1962. That's a typo. But this is one of the more fits more of the mid-century modern look. And we found one house that fits the style we would call contemporary. And we're correlating these with Virginia McAllister's excellent Field Guide to American Houses, a book I recommend everyone interested in architecture take a look at. Contemporary houses are definitely embracing the modern look, but unlike ranch houses, they can have two-story sections and different segments. We found this really interesting one, again, photographed from the public right-of-way. Nice zoom lens, but not entering the property. This is on Manchester Road near St. Albans in that area. So it kind of illustrates the use of natural materials like the wooden siding, but still a very modern form that's breaking from traditional patterns of building. There are two that fit what we call indeterminate. That just means they really don't have enough stylistic characteristics to be neatly categorized. One of those is next to the Church of God in Glencoe, here on Wolsey Lane. That is identified in a previous survey by Leslie Hamilton. Again, is potentially related. It comes after the house's construction. by 13 years, it's a very similar type of building and with this raised stone foundation and frame form. The other one is here on Old Highway 109, built in 1950, where we have sort of the stucco over masonry in this frame roof pattern. Interesting buildings. And unfortunately, in this level of survey, we don't spend, we don't dig deep and we don't also get property access. But I'm sure there's some stories here, and if anyone in the audience has stories to tell, that would be great. I'm going to kind of come to an end here in Lindy Lane. We had 4 dwellings built on Lindy Lane. 3 of them minimal traditional, one of them the ranch house shown here. These were built in 1948, 1949, 1950, all on the single street. That raises some questions about future surveys, which Robin and I have discussed. Well, looking at these individually through this kind of a survey means unless they have some really exceptional architectural features or a unique origin story, they're not going to be found eligible. But the concentration on a single street in a relatively undeveloped part of the county in this period where there's a great housing boom coming after World War II, with the GI Bill and various federal incentives emerging, this could be a potential historic district. And so, a recommendation or thought for future surveys is maybe to look more geographically, look at clusters of buildings, rather than continuing to extend 75 years, or do both. But again, most of these buildings we look at are several miles apart. It takes a while even to drive from building to building when you're out in the field. But the relationships of buildings around them, if we're looking at different periods of time, maybe we would see patterns of development, a single developer, or more of an intentional plan. So Lindy Lane is really intriguing. And I'm actually recommending to the city of Wildwood in this report that a survey of Lindy Lane be done to see if there's something really important here. So that's the conclusion of this survey. I just wanted to show you briefly, the forms are very kind of official looking and dull on the front end, but they do record a lot of useful information, and they include location maps and site plans. If you're wondering what the city gave me about your property, it's mostly just addresses, and then these aerial site plans, which are required by the State Historic Preservation Office, to whom we will submit this survey. Photographs of the houses. Usually it's one, unless it's a super complicated structure. There might be 1 or 2. This is a view here. And then we get on these additional information. And, again, on a lot of these, it's more like assertions based on surmises, like, does this fit patterns in construction? We think it's built in this year. But in some instances, and we hope there were a lot of these, it didn't turn out to be quite as many as I wanted, but we found information through the St. Louis Daily Record and other sources. Here, we actually have a building permit issued on May 25th, 1950, appearing in the Daily Record with information about the construction, the roof, oil heating, and the original owner, Farrell Davis, I don't want to mangle that name, in Glencoe, Missouri. And then a biographical search on this person, Farrell Jack Timberline Davis, came back from World War II as a veteran, having served in a bombardment squadron in the Army, Air Force. And he appears in this amateur radio call book, living in the Central West End in an apartment. So it's also interesting. He's coming back to the city and then moving out here. And he's born in Georgia. So what brings him to this area? Those are questions to ponder, but maybe some of these forms then could be useful for genealogists and local historians trying to learn more about who lives in Wildwood, even if the buildings don't get listed as officially historic. And so there's descriptions of the environment and the buildings. And, again, all of this is done from what can be found from public right of way and also using public documents and online sources. So there's no secret surveillance or traipsing through anyone's yards. I'm going to stop right there and leave it at that.
Are there any questions for Dr. Allen? Dr. Allen, we have one.
Okay, great.
Yes, I've got a question. Route 66 going through Wildwood. How would that fit into being registered as a historic district? Since it has various dates, various things were developed along there, but it does have an historical significance
Mhm.
in terms, like you mentioned, Lindy Lane. I'm thinking Route 6 or old Route 66, not old Route 66.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Lindy Lane has the property that the National Register of Historic Places rules looks for, which is contiguousness or properties being adjacent. And um, Route 66 doesn't present that necessarily. So, one path to get more resources that aren't physically touching connected would be what's called a multiple property documentation form, which essentially is just a historic district where the resources don't touch each other. And it creates the same kind of context of all this is collectively significant. But then it allows for individual buildings to compose that listing that can be several miles apart. And that would be a good strategy to pursue. And actually has been done in Missouri. I think in Springfield, Missouri, they pursue their Route 66 heritage that way. So there's even a model out there. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you.
Other questions for Dr. Allen? Dr. Allen, thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
miss you here in St. Louis.
I miss St. Louis. I hope to get back this year and keep up the great work in Wildwood. I mean, Joe and Robin are so tremendously easy to work with. You've got really great staff here, and your forward-looking preservation work is, I don't know, a lot more fun than what some commissions deal with. So kudos.
Thank you, Dr. Allen.
All right.
Well, we want to let you know that historic preservation people are not all these old folks with gray hair. We have youth, and we are so excited. We have two youth commissioners. They sit up here with us for each commission meeting, and they bring a lot to us, and we are just so pleased to have them. So I'd like to introduce, and excuse me, the kids know I shouldn't call them kids. Young people know that I always butcher their names, but here I go to try. Ayushi Boer and Avi Reg. He gave us a great pronunciation the other night, and it just went right out that door. Reg something. Regimon. Okay? So here, Ayusha and Avi.
Hi, good evening. My name is Avyuk,
And I'm Ayushi.
and we are the two youth members of the City of Wildwood Historic Preservation Commission, and we would like to talk to you today about the youth programs that the commission does. During the 2022 to 2023 school year, a youth-led program was established in the City of Wildwood called the Route 66 Student Task Force. We worked on initiatives focused on historical preservation and community engagement, with our primary project being the Route 66 Roadside Park. The task force got a chance to contribute to the planning of key features of the park, including interpretive signage and artistic displays. The opportunity provided valuable exposure to urban planning, historic preservation, and civic leadership. Every member of our team played an important role in our successful awareness campaign in April, otherwise known as Route 66 Month, where we brought the youth and adult community together for a drive-through movie night of playing Cars, which is based on Route 66, and a scavenger hunt. The Wildwood Route 66 revitalization efforts are geared up for future years, and we would always appreciate creating awareness of the Mother Road and Wildwood's important part of it.
So we also participate in a lot of fun citywide events. So one of our biggest one was the back to school party, and that was held on August 16th. And basically at the event, we had a lot of fun activities. We had like a racetrack that was Route 66 themed. We had like a zombie road throw game and an Essen log building activity. And so Avyukt and I, as youth commissioners, we helped create a lot of these activities. So I helped with the racetrack a lot, and he helped a lot with the log cabin. And at the event, I got to talk to the community while working at the zombie road game, and it was a lot of fun engaging with the people of Wildwood. We also attend other events like Music on Main and Celebrate Wildwood. And these are all just really fun events that I get to talk with the community about Wildwood's history and learn more about it myself. So, as a youth commissioner, I've learned so much about the local government and how everything works through sitting at commission meetings, the process that goes behind projects, and everything behind the scenes. And my personal favorite moment so far is when we went on a field trip to Innsbruck, Missouri to visit the Innsbruck Historical Society and visit their log cabin project that was really similar to the one that's occurring in Wildwood right now, the Essen log cabin. And so overall, this is a really unique opportunity, and I've had a lot of fun and learned a lot so far.
As a youth commissioner, I've also learned a great deal of Wildwood's history. And I also really love when we have all these historic events like our Celebrate Wildwood event. And we also held a back to school party. And these events just give us a great opportunity to go out, talk to people, and really spread awareness about Route 66, about historic preservation, and a lot of revitalization efforts that we're doing. And I remember this one event that we did. It was like a map activity where we pretty much had this map set up, and everyone would come to our station and place exactly what community of Wildwood they lived in. For example, like Grover and Fox Creek. And that was a really fun activity because we got to really engage everyone and bring everyone together to pretty much like say where they are in Wildwood. And it was a really overall fun activity. And the commission has given me a great opportunity to participate in community outreach and contribute to meaningful outreach events and historical initiatives. The commission is always looking for new ways to engage the youth and families of Wildwood to learn more about our local history.
So if you know anyone that's interested in becoming a youth commissioner, whenever there's a vacancy, any high schooler is eligible for this role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, you see what I mean? They're great. Is Mr. Hyman extending the camera? Okay. Our next presenter is Mr. Conan Hinman, St. Louis County's historian. He'll tell us more about the county's Historic Buildings Commission. Mr. Hinman? Miss, sorry. Not even you.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Gwen Hinman. I'm the Historic and Cultural Sites Manager for St. Louis County Parks and Recreation. I am also your county historian. So I was asked to come and talk to you guys a little bit about the St. Louis County Historic Buildings Commission, but I'm also going to cover a little bit of the history that we have at county parks in the hopes to encourage you guys to get out to our sites and kind of see what we have. So you all might be surprised to learn that county level historic preservation is administered by our Parks Department. It's certainly not an unusual setup, but was certainly different to me when I arrived. So let's see. So just a brief overview of the county parks. So we have 68 county parks, 14,000 acres, 6 recreation complexes, 180 miles of trails, 5 historic and cultural sites, and 7 properties listed on the National Register. So it is a vast, large countywide system. So there are 2 parks located in Wildwood, West Tyson and Greensfelder Park. We've also leased out Packwood and Bellevue Farms as well as Bluffview to the city of Wildwood. Yes, I see you nodding. I got that right. So we also have, as I said, 7 properties listed on the National Register. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of our historic sites and some of those National Register listings. So we have the Jarvo House at Queenie Park, which was built in 1854. So this is the future home of the administrative offices for the Parks Department. Yeah. It is cool. Yeah. So it's been vacant for quite a while. Some of you might remember it was the former home of the Dog Museum for many years. I believe it's been vacant since 2018. So we're looking to move the park's administrative offices from Clayton to Queenie Park in the coming years. We also have the NIMS Mansion at Beech Tree Park, which was built in 1929. We're actually just completing a slate roof repair on the house, which is actually going to finish up next week. So you guys can imagine that was a very inexpensive project. Jefferson Barracks, established in 1826. Next year, we actually have our 200th anniversary of the park. So be on the lookout for some of our anniversary celebratory events. Faust Park is also one of our jewels in the park system. So what you're looking at there, I love it. No, I love it. It's wonderful. So what you're looking at there is Thornhill, the home of former Governor Bates, built around 1818. So I'd also be remiss to not tell you guys that we're also in the midst of reconstructing some cabins at Faust Park. So we acquired 2 cabins from Creve Coeur 2 years ago. And so we're in the midst of reconstructing those. So if you guys come out to the park this summer, you'll kind of see those in different stages of development, which is really exciting. Okay, got to check. We also have Fort Bell Fountain and the General Daniel Bissell House in North County. So Fort Bell Fountain was established in 1805. The General Daniel Bissell House dates back to around 1815. Some of our more modern properties, we have the Frank Lloyd Wright House at Ebsworth Park, which was built in 1959, as well as Laumeier Sculpture Park, which was established in 1976. So Ebsworth Park and Laumeier are really excellent examples we have of public-private partnerships. So we have nonprofit partners that help us to administer the site and do some of the programming. So those are 2 partnerships that we're actually really proud of. So how did parks get into the history business? So the Parks Department was established in 1950. So this year is our 75th anniversary. So quickly thereafter, the Parks Department acquired Jefferson Barracks and the Bissell House over the next few years. So the county at that point decided that they needed to, they had a need for an advisory board of historians to assist with the development of their museums and their historic sites. In 1957, the Historic Buildings Commission was established by then County Executive Luman Matthews, and the HBC still exists today. So they have a couple of responsibilities. I'm going to read this long, boring slide. The Historic Buildings Commission is established within the Department of Parks and Recreation. They advise the Department of Parks and Recreation, the County Executive, the County Council, and Planning Commission regarding the identification and preservation of historic resources throughout St. Louis County. The commission was originally created by executive order in 1957 and was confirmed by ordinance in 1983. So all of that to say that they have a couple of primary responsibilities. So one, they advise on preservation issues throughout St. Louis County. So we often advise the county executive on certain issues that pop up when certain historic properties are threatened with demolition. The Historic Buildings Commission will speak up in those situations. Specifically, I'm thinking of Mary Cliff. And so they also administer the county landmark program. Let's see. So HBC has designated, has designated the most important historic buildings in the county as county landmarks. This designation carries no restrictions, but is intended to be an honor and increase awareness. So those of you that are property owners that are interested in yet another designation, you want to just stack them up. Your properties are more than likely eligible for listing as a county landmark. So again, it does not place any restrictions on your home. It's more just an honor and a designation, and it just sort of brings awareness to preservation across the county. So we're always looking for new properties to recognize. Currently, there's only 11 in Wildwood. So we'd love to add a few more. So back to this slide. So the HBC also gives out preservation awards every year. So they really like to recognize and honor adaptive reuse in historic buildings. So they work to encourage preservation by individuals and government jurisdictions that use adaptive reuse of historic buildings when they can no longer remain in their original use. So since 1982, the HBC has presented annual awards for outstanding adaptive reuse, plus other awards from time to time. So one such example that I've seen already twice back here is the Hoppenberg Fix store, which was rehabbed by long-term HBC Commissioner Lauren Strutman, who is probably your neighbor. We love Lauren. So lastly, the HBC also has the power to recommend that historic property in an unincorporated portion of the county receive a zoning overlay known as a landmark preservation area. So that does not apply to Wildwood, but any unincorporated areas would be eligible for the LPA. So basically what that is, it's a zoning variance that gives someone, let's say in a residential zoning area, the ability to run a business, to change the zoning overlay on their home, if it's a historic home in your residential area. So for example, a wedding venue or a bed and breakfast come to mind. So, this is not used very often. There's only 3 currently in place in the county. But some municipalities have adopted the LPA designation, including Chesterfield and Wildwood. So that brings me to the end. So there's a lot more I could discuss. We have a lot of really exciting projects going on at the county, a lot of great things coming our way. But I'm just going to kind of leave it open to you guys for some questions that you might have.
Any questions?
Yeah. County landmark status. We do. It's on our website. So if you just go to the webpage for Historic Buildings Commission, it'll have those. And so it also lists some really fun things like some of the neon signs that we have in the county. And you might be familiar with the ice cream cone that's in front of, what's the name of that school in Afton? I can't remember the name of it. So there's some fun sort of Route 66 themed things that you guys might find interesting. Those are my favorite. Yeah. Thanks for your question. Just over 5 years. I started in late 2019, so just before COVID. So I worked for the State Historical Society of North Dakota. I managed their state historic sites.
So Gwen, how do you work with local municipalities in your work, and how can Wildwood be more involved at the county level?
Great question. So I try as much as I can to get out to the municipalities, specifically the small local historical societies and people running little house museums, and try and provide support and be a resource to those groups and those folks in need. So as far as getting involved, we'd love to see more people join our Historic Buildings Commission. Our numbers have been dwindling for years. We do not have term limits. So if you guys are still interested in being involved in preservation sort of at that government level, that's a wonderful way to be involved. As far as you guys, homeowners and property owners, nominating your property for county landmark status is a great way to sort of build awareness and kind of bring that to people's attention that this is a program that we administer. So that's another great way to get involved. Also just visiting some of our historic sites, specifically Faust Park. Is a great choice always. There's a number of historic buildings there that y'all probably would enjoy. So I did. Yes, he's still around. He still comes in every now and then. He's still on our HBC. So he travels quite a bit, but when I do see him, he's doing great. So I did take over his responsibilities.
Other questions for our representative from St. Louis County?
Sure. I mean, I can point out what these are. These are all our historic sites that I mentioned during the presentation. So, okay. Oh, right. County landmark. Yes. Yes, that's Whitehaven. So yes. Yeah, so they did a historical paint analysis and determined it wasn't white. So yeah. Yeah, it's even more jarring in person. I promise you that. Yes. The Tapmeyer House in Creve Coeur. And then the bottom left is the Bethel Church here in Wildwood. So from is he from Wildwood or okay. Mhm. Yeah, we
Okay.
have I think 130 county landmarks. So there are many, some demolished, but we have many. So thanks.
Other questions?
That's a great question. With maybe a little bit of a complicated answer. So currently standing would either be Bissell House or Thornhill at Faust Park. So both of those, the dates are, we have a range, but we don't know specifically like when this house was constructed. But after this summer, we will have the Clester Cabin reconstructed in Faust Park, which we think dates to the 1790s, which would make it one of the oldest buildings in St. Louis County. So it was originally located on private land in Creve Coeur, and then it was moved in the 1960s to Millennium Park in Creve Coeur, and it was there up until 3 years ago. And they wanted to demolish that to make way for a walking path, I think. So County Parks, we stepped in and disassembled 2 cabins there actually, and they've been moved to Faust Park, and those will be reconstructed. So we were happy to be able to do that. So soon that will be the oldest building we have. Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentation. And I'm going to take a liberty here. I don't get an opportunity to face to face with St. Louis County and the partners we have, and I want to thank them for all they do here in Wildwood with Greensfelder County Park and the leases you've negotiated with us so we can have wonderful park space available for our residents and those of St. Louis County and the visitors to the area. So thank you very much. You do a great job.
I'd like to give a little plug to the Boy Scouts. If you know a young man who's working on or about to work on his Eagle project, our son did his Eagle Scout work back in the late 1970s with St. Louis County Parks. He worked at Lawmeyer, Jefferson Barracks, Bee Tree, and one other, it escapes me now, but they were planting trees, and he led that with his troop. And they also built little areas for the small mammals to have hideaways. So they can always find something for the young people to do towards their Eagle Scout projects and the Girl Scout Gold Awards. So if you know someone, head them that direction. They'll find something for them to do. Our final presenter this evening is Linda Hartkamp. She's president of Wildwood Historic Society. This is a separate society. It is not really part of the Wildwood Historic Preservation Commission, although she does come and has a seat and is able to share a lot with us on the commission, but she is not a commissioner. But we always look forward to what she has to tell us each month. So Linda, it's yours now.
Hello, everybody. I really don't have a whole lot to say. I was told I was supposed to talk about we own the historic Hankin House. I don't know if everybody knows where we're located. We're the driveway just west of Stovall's. If everybody knows where Stovall's Dance Hall is on 100, well, we're the next driveway. We've got a meeting hall, which used to be the chicken coop, and we added on to it to turn it into a meeting hall. We've got a museum there, and there's a 2-story white frame house. It's the Hankin House. It's coming up on being 175 years old. We tried to get it on the National Registry of Historic Places. And our hook is that it was where the Keeler Post of the GAR was formed. Anybody that doesn't know, the GAR stands for the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a group of former Union soldiers from the Civil War. A couple of my great-great-grandpas were from that post. And that's where it was formed and organized. After a couple of years, it moved to Crime Camp store. If anybody, people that know where Crime Camps is, and that store is still there. And then in the late years, as their numbers dwindled, they went back to meeting at the Hankin House. Well, we tried to get it registered. That was our hook, to get it registered from the National Register of Historic Places. Unfortunately, back in the 30s, 1930s, and the 1950s, a lot of alterations were made to the exterior of the house. Like if you drive by on 100 and you're looking at the front of the house, well, that was really the back of the house. The front of the house was on the other side. There was like a store in there. And part of the original Route 66 bridge abutment is on our property. But because of the alterations, I mean, a 2-car garage was added, porches disappeared, there was an addition put on the second floor, and National Service said, too bad for you. You know, and our main goal in getting it designated was to get federal funding and money nationally, because we're a nonprofit organization. We're still paying off the mortgage on the property. But anybody is welcome to come to our meetings. We meet the third Tuesday of the month, and we don't really have a meeting. We have a guest speaker. So there is no, quote, meeting. It's a guest speaker with refreshments afterwards. And we publish an annual calendar. And I brought this year's calendar and some of the past calendars, only because you're not looking at it for the calendar part. As you turn to each page, there's a story on every page. And we come up with a theme. This coming year, next year's calendar will be on Route 66, obviously, for the anniversary year. This year's calendar was, it was, in their own words, yeah, it was, some of us talked about memories from there, but there's like the World War II calendar is there, the historic towns of Wildwood, that calendar is there. So help yourself, those calendars are free. And anybody, like I said, is welcome to come. The third Tuesday of the month, we meet at 7:00 in the chicken coop. So just come on down and yeah, they start in March. We take January and February off because, well, we know what the weather was like this January. So yeah, we decided January and February, the weather's too iffy and it's a little dark when you get out that far west. So does anybody have any questions about the Historical Society? And you don't have to live out here either. I actually live in Ellisville, was born and raised in Richmond Heights, but my family roots are out here. My family founded their home place out here in the 1840s. Yeah, I forgot to include that. If you know whose property you're on, because originally this was all farmland out here. Even if you don't know, we've got old plat maps and we can probably locate your property and tell you, okay, you're on so-and-so's farm. And we've got lots of files with lots of information and pictures and can probably give you a history about where your property is located. You want to get on the National Register? Maybe you got a house that was from the Montgomery Ward catalog. You know, you could buy a Montgomery Ward catalog house and it would come out on the railroad. And we're not that far from the railroad out here. So we have, yes, obviously those are some of my members that I conned into coming tonight. Yeah. So like I said, and yeah, the museum is not open every day, but if you take one of the calendars, there's probably on there, there's the contact information. Me or Lynn, somebody will be gladly meet you out there and take you through the museum. Whether it's during the day or in the evening or on a weekend. We're supposed to be open Monday mornings from 9 to noon, but we're not real good about always being there. When we show up, it's usually to vacuum the floors. Yeah. So if nobody else has any questions, well, I'll go drink more hot chocolate and eat cookies. And thank you all for having me.
Thanks, Linda. We always learn something new every time we listen to people who are presenting. We've talked a lot about history tonight. I'll just add a little bit. I was not born and raised in this area. I moved out to this area in 1985. And a few years later, I found out that my fourth great grandfather had had a Spanish land grant right up the road from where I am living. And that led to my third great grandfather had a Spanish land grant over on Pond Road. Another fourth grade uncle had one down in Glencoe. In fact, there were two of them that had grants down there. And the daughters of the family all married their neighbors who had Spanish land grants. So there was only one of the children in the family who did not have a land grant, but he bought his dad's property when his dad was in poor health. So that's how he got in on it, but he did not have the land grant. And I'd like to say that Angie over here, wave Angie, lives on my fourth great grandfather's Spanish land grant property, and it is known as the Red Barn Farm, still a farm right in the city limits of Wildwood. So, you know, we may say we're a city, but we still have the farms too, and we need them. So thanks again for coming tonight. It's been enjoyable for me. I hope it has been for you. And there's still hot chocolate and cookies. And now it's time to get to know you. And so it's a time to corner some people and chat. And there's a gentleman here with his finger in the air. Yes, sir. Lincoln House. 1852. It- Somebody needs to share some more information, right? We're glad you're sharing because that's what it's all about. We need to share. And, my family came in the 1790s, but there are no buildings left that were theirs when they were